的好。
Can Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines really deter China? That's the question sitting quietly behind almost every strategic conversation in East Asia right now. Not can they defeat China, not can they outspend China, but can they deter it? Can three very different actors, one economic heavyweight, one frontline island democracy, and one Southeast Asian maritime state, together create enough friction to make Beijing pause? Because deterrence isn't about theatrics. It's about calculation. It's about whether the cost of action starts to look uncomfortably high.
全国各族人民传承和弘扬伟大抗战精神，中华民族伟大复兴势不可挡。
And if there is a backbone in this emerging triangle, it's Japan. Japan is the only one of the three with full-spectrum advanced military capability. That matters. It fields a highly modern navy, advanced air assets, missile defense systems, and increasingly sophisticated counter-strike capabilities. It operates in the same technological league as top-tier Western militaries. That gives the triangle structural depth. Economically, Japan is still a giant. With a GDP of roughly $4.2 trillion, it remains one of the largest economies in the world. And unlike smaller regional actors, Japan has the fiscal capacity to sustain prolonged competition. Defense spending is on a clear upward trajectory, projected around $75 billion in 2025, with a commitment to reach 2% of GDP by 2027. That shift alone represents one of the most significant strategic pivots in post-war Japanese history. But what really sets Japan apart is its industrial base. Shipbuilding, aerospace engineering, advanced missile systems, radar technologies, semiconductor production. These aren't abstract strengths. They translate directly into military resilience and supply chain security. In long-term competition, the side that can manufacture, repair, and innovate consistently tends to endure. And here's something important. Japan isn't just building for itself anymore. It's increasingly enabling partners. Through security assistance, defense technology cooperation, and operational integration, Tokyo is multiplying capability across the region. That's a quiet force multiplier. If deterrence in East Asia is going to work, it requires credibility. Japan provides that credibility. It has alliance depth with the United States, growing operational alignment with the Philippines, and strategic stakes tied directly to Taiwan's security.
我衷心期盼台湾和日本能够在经济、安全、高科技产业以及强化社会韧性等领域持续深化合作，共同努力实现自由开放的印度太平洋的愿景。
Instability in the Taiwan Strait would immediately impact Japan's southwestern islands and its sea lines of communication. So when we ask whether this triangle can deter China, the first variable is whether Japan remains committed, capable, and strategically steady. Right now, the answer appears to be yes. The deeper question is whether Japan's strength, when combined with Taiwan's geographic centrality and the Philippines' maritime positioning, creates enough integrated resistance to shift Beijing's risk calculus. That's where this becomes interesting. Now let's get specific about the hard power, because when we talk about deterrence, ships and submarines matter. A lot. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force isn't symbolic. It's operationally serious. Japan fields roughly 50 major surface combatants. That's not a token fleet. These are modern destroyers and frigates equipped with advanced sensors, anti-submarine warfare systems, and integrated air defense capabilities. They are built for high-end maritime conflict, not just patrol duty. Then there are the 8 Aegis-equipped destroyers. That's a big deal. Aegis systems provide ballistic missile defense capability, meaning Japan can detect, track, and potentially intercept incoming missile threats. In a regional environment where missile inventories are expanding rapidly, that defensive layer is crucial. It complicates any adversary's first strike assumptions. Below the surface, Japan operates around 22 advanced diesel-electric submarines, including the Strait and newer Taiji classes. These boats are quiet, extremely quiet. optimized for operating in the complex undersea geography of the East China Sea and surrounding waters. In maritime deterrence, submarines are psychological weapons as much as physical ones. You don't know exactly where they are, and that uncertainty forces caution. And then there are the two Izumo-class helicopter carriers. They're being modified to operate F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing fighters. That transformation effectively gives Japan light aircraft carrier capability. It extends air power projection beyond land-based airfields and enhances flexibility in crisis scenarios, especially around the Ryukyu Island chain and potentially in support of broader regional contingencies. Put simply, Japan operates one of the most capable navies in Asia outside the United States. That's not hype, it's structural reality. For any deterrence framework involving Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, Japan provides the blue water backbone. It brings advanced anti-air, anti-submarine, and missile defense capabilities. It brings logistics depth. It brings industrial sustainment. Without Japan, the triangle would feel fragile. With Japan, it becomes something much harder to ignore. Japan's air power is another critical piece of the deterrence puzzle, and it's easy to underestimate just how capable it is. The Japanese Air Self-Defense Force fields over 300 modern fighters, and that number is not static. Japan is actively acquiring F-35s, both the A and B variants, with plans for over 140 in total. That's stealth-capable, multi-role aircraft with sensor fusion, long-range strike capability, and survivability in contested airspaces. The F-35B, in particular, when deployed from the Izumo-class carriers, allows Japan to project air power beyond the mainland, which is a game-changer for regional flexibility. On top of that, Japan has advanced ISR and early warning systems integrated into its air defense network. Think radar, airborne warning and control, satellite intelligence, and electronic warfare assets all connected in near real time. This gives Japan not just fighters, but situational awareness, the ability to detect, track, and respond to threats before they become crises. Japan's air power complements its naval capabilities perfectly. Destroyers and submarines control the seas, carriers and fighters control the skies, and ISR systems tie everything together. For deterrence, it's the combination of visibility, rapid response, and strike credibility that really counts. In short, Japan doesn't just have planes, it has the eyes, the reach, and the teeth to make any adversary think twice before escalating. Japan's security posture has shifted dramatically in recent years. The 2022 National Security Strategy signaled a move from reactive defense to structured deterrence. Tokyo is now acquiring counterstrike capabilities, including Tomahawk land attack missiles, and expanding its long-range missile arsenal. This isn't just about defense. It's about signaling that Japan can respond to threats with credible, preemptive precision if necessary. Japan's deep alliance with the United States remains central. It ensures operational interoperability, access to advanced technology, and extended deterrence. Beyond the bilateral US-Japan axis, Tokyo is increasingly engaging in trilateral exercises with the Philippines, often in waters adjacent to Taiwan. These exercises test coordination, strengthen readiness, and send clear signals to potential adversaries. Regional maritime security is a shared responsibility. Japan is actively transitioning from decades of reactive pacifism to a posture built on integrated deterrence, combining advanced hardware, operational alliances, and strategic signaling. Unlike Japan, Taiwan isn't focused on projecting power across oceans. Its strategy is denial, making any potential invasion so costly and risky that an adversary would hesitate before acting.
台湾是否为一个国家？根据国家主权4个要素，台澎金马，这是土地；定期改选各级政府执行公权力，这是政府，这是治权，并对外进行外交，拥有国防力量，这是主权。由这块土地上的2300万人民所组成的政治共同体，是不是一个国家？是国家的人举手一下来。谢谢你们，我们掌声为台湾喝彩。台湾当然是一个国家啊。
Taiwan's economy is smaller than Japan's, with a GDP of roughly $800 billion. But it punches far above its weight globally. Over 60% of the world's semiconductors come from Taiwan, and TSMC alone controls more than 90% of advanced chip production. That makes Taiwan not just a regional player, but a linchpin in the global technology supply chain. Conflict here would ripple worldwide, making Taiwan's security a matter of international economic interest. Personnel. Taiwan maintains an active force of about 170,000, supported by a reserve system that is currently being restructured. Conscription has been extended to 1 year, reflecting a push to improve readiness and build a more capable force. Taiwan fields Patriot PAC-3 systems and indigenous Skybow air defense, while expanding its stockpile of anti-ship missiles like the Xiongfeng 2 and 30. These systems are designed to protect critical infrastructure, ports, and airfields from long-range attack. Taiwan operates 4 submarines with new indigenous programs underway, maintains a large inventory of anti-ship cruise missiles, mobile coastal defense units, sea mines, and fast attack craft. The overall doctrine is clear: deny access, raise the cost of invasion, and exploit geography and asymmetric tools to make aggression prohibitively expensive. In essence, Taiwan is a fortress built not for global reach, but for strategic denial. Its geography, technology, and military posture create a multi-layered shield designed to make any adversary think twice before attempting a landing. This combination of economic centrality and defensive military capability makes Taiwan a uniquely high-stakes actor in the deterrence triangle with Japan and the Philippines. The Philippines doesn't have the firepower of Japan or the high-tech defenses of Taiwan, but its strategic value is undeniable. Its strength lies in geography, controlling key maritime choke points that connect the South China Sea, the Philippine Sea, and the Bashi Channel. In a conflict scenario, this location can complicate Chinese naval movements and provide a critical advantage to allied forces coordinating in the region. Economically, the Philippines is smaller, with a GDP around $440 billion and a defense budget of roughly $4-5 billion, though it's gradually rising. Through the AFP modernization program, Manila is improving capabilities incrementally. It may not be able to project high-end power, but it is steadily building a force capable of layered deterrence and operational integration with partners. Militarily, the Philippines remains limited. Its navy has few surface combatants, and its air force relies on FA-50 light fighters from South Korea. But recent investments in coastal radar and ISR systems, especially with Japanese assistance, are enhancing maritime domain awareness. Alongside 9 EDCA access sites with the U.S., these upgrades increase flexibility, readiness, and coordination with allied forces. Ultimately, the Philippines' geographic position is its true leverage. Sitting astride critical sea lanes, it can shape naval operations, influence the movement of forces, and serve as a crucial node in a broader trilateral deterrence framework alongside Japan and Taiwan. In strategic terms, location and cooperation can outweigh raw capability. China sits at the center of gravity in this regional equation. Its economy alone, with a GDP around $17-18 trillion, dwarfs its neighbors, and it is the largest trading partner for most of Asia. That economic reach translates into deep financial leverage across ASEAN, giving Beijing tools to influence policy and stability without firing a shot. Militarily, the People's Liberation Army is massive and rapidly modernizing. The PLAN is the largest navy in the world by ship count, with over 370 vessels, including 3 aircraft carriers. Liaoning, Shandong, and Fujian, dozens of destroyers and frigates, and an expanding submarine fleet, including nuclear-powered boats. Its missile arsenal, from DF-21D carrier killers to DF-26 intermediate-range missiles, forms a robust anti-access/area denial umbrella that complicates any approach. In the air, China fields more than 2,000 combat aircraft, including J-20 fifth-generation stealth fighters, giving it escalation dominance in localized conflicts near its coast. Deterrence depends on 3 variables: capability, credibility, and cohesion. Individually, Japan, Taiwan, or the Philippines cannot deter China. Japan brings high-end naval and air power, Taiwan brings hardened denial defenses, and the Philippines offers critical geographic choke points. Together, they don't match China's raw scale, but they create a complex operational puzzle, forcing Beijing to allocate resources across multiple fronts. The U.S. factor is decisive. Without Washington's backing, the triangle's deterrence potential drops dramatically. With U.S. integration, Japan's navy combines with American naval strength, the Philippines becomes a staging and logistics hub, and Taiwan's denial strategy gains credibility. The triangle only becomes a credible deterrent within a broader alliance framework. Operational geography further amplifies this. If coordinated, Japan controls northern access, Taiwan blocks the central Taiwan Strait, and the Philippines threatens the southern approach through the Bashi Channel. Multi-axis pressure increases costs and uncertainty for China, the very essence of deterrence. Yet the triangle has clear weaknesses. There is no formal trilateral defense treaty, political volatility in the Philippines, Taiwan's diplomatic isolation, Japan's constitutional constraints, and China's economic leverage over all three. Cohesion remains fragile, and maintaining a consistent, coordinated posture is a challenge. So, can Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines deter China? Not independently. Possibly collectively. Credibly, only with U.S. integration. Deterrence here is not about defeating China outright. It is about raising the costs of aggression, complicating PLA operational planning, increasing escalation risks, and making conflict unpredictable and prolonged. The triangle's advantage is structural and layered, not symmetrical. Geography, alliance networks, asymmetric defense, maritime choke points, and integrated ISR and missile denial create friction. The real question isn't whether they can overpower China, it's whether they can make aggression irrational. And that, strategically, is exactly what deterrence is supposed to do.
Japan hands over 5 coastal radar systems to the Philippines, aimed to strengthen Manila's maritime domain awareness and coastal defense capability.
We will not stand alone. That was the quiet but unmistakable message behind Tokyo's latest move. This week, Japan formally transferred 5 coastal radar systems to the Philippines under its official security assistance framework, a move that, on paper, costs about JP 600 million. Roughly $4 million. Not massive money in defense terms. Not flashy fighter jets. Not missile batteries. Just radars. But here's the real question, and it's the one that should make everyone sit up. Why would something as ordinary as coastal radar suddenly matter so much in the Indo-Pacific? Because in today's South China Sea, what you see determines whether you survive. And Manila knows that better than most. For years, Filipino fishermen have described spotting unfamiliar vessels near disputed shoals, gray hulls on the horizon, Coast Guard ships shadowing supply boats, maritime militia moving in swarms. You can't defend what you cannot track. You can't protest what you cannot document.
You have entered of the People's Republic of China.
Maritime disputes don't begin with missiles. They begin with blips on a screen. That's what makes this transfer so strategically loaded. Japan isn't just handing over equipment. It's helping the Philippines see farther, earlier, and more clearly in waters that have become increasingly tense, especially in the West Philippine Sea, where standoffs, water cannon incidents, and close-quarter maneuvers are no longer rare events but routine pressure tactics. And here's something even more interesting. The Philippines is the only country to receive Japanese official security assistance for 3 consecutive years since 2023. That's not a coincidence. That's alignment. Tokyo is signaling consistency. Manila is signaling trust. And together, they're signaling something else to the region. Middle powers are no longer passive observers in great power competition. It may sound dramatic, but it's true. In modern maritime competition, radar is power. It feeds maritime domain awareness. It strengthens ISR networks. It creates an information advantage. And information advantage is deterrence's quiet backbone. There's something almost poetic about this. Japan, A country once constitutionally constrained in defense posture now actively supports Southeast Asian maritime security. The Philippines, once cautious about provoking larger powers, now leaning into layered partnerships. History moves in strange arcs. And let's be honest, this isn't just about 5 radar systems. It's about whether smaller coastal states can maintain sovereignty in contested waters without being forced into submission or dependence. It's about whether alliances can adapt fast enough to shifting power balances. It's about whether deterrence can remain below the threshold of open conflict. The systems themselves will enhance Manila's maritime domain awareness and intelligence gathering capabilities. That means better tracking of vessels, better documentation of incidents, better integration with naval and Coast Guard units, and ultimately better coordination with allies. Quiet capability building. No theatrics, just steady reinforcement. But strategically, it strengthens Manila, Tokyo defense alignment at a moment when the South China Sea is no longer a peripheral issue. It's central to Indo-Pacific security architecture. Sometimes, power doesn't arrive with headlines about aircraft carriers. Sometimes it arrives in shipping crates, labeled coastal surveillance system. And if you're watching the Indo-Pacific closely, you know, that's the kind of development that changes the balance slowly, quietly, and maybe permanently. Let's be real for a moment. This radar transfer did not happen in calm waters. It happened in the middle of a region that feels increasingly pressured, watched, and tested. The South China Sea carries more than $3 trillion in global trade every year. That number gets repeated a lot. But pause and think about it. Energy shipments, container traffic, food supply chains, the movement of electronics and critical components. All of it flowing through waters that are now heavily contested. When tension rises there, it's not just a regional issue. It ripples outward. From 2024 to 2026, the Philippines has reported a steady increase in encounters with Chinese maritime militia and Coast Guard vessels. Not occasional sightings, not symbolic patrols, regular friction. The Philippine Coast Guard has documented dozens of coercive incidents annually, particularly around Second Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Shoal, and Ayungin Shoal. These places are no longer distant legal disputes argued in conference rooms. They've become live operational flashpoints. Water cannons, blocking maneuvers, shadowing tactics, close-range standoffs that stop just short of escalation. And here's the thing, most of these confrontations start quietly. A vessel appears on the horizon, another follows. Then more. If you can't track them early, if you can't record patterns, if you can't prove presence, you're already reacting instead of shaping events. That's why maritime domain awareness matters so much right now. It's not dramatic, it's fundamental.
You are sailing within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone.
At the same time, Manila has been expanding its broader security posture. Under the Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program, particularly Horizon 3, the country is pursuing a multi-billion-dollar procurement plan that stretches into 2028. The defense budget has moved upward from roughly $240 billion in 2023, with a steady climb through 2024 and 2025. It's not an overnight transformation, but it signals intent. A shift from minimal deterrence toward layered capability. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States has also expanded to 9 locations. That matters strategically. It spreads logistical access, increases interoperability, and complicates adversarial planning. Add to that the growing trilateral coordination between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, joint exercises, Coast Guard cooperation, shared signaling, and you start to see a network taking shape rather than isolated bilateral ties. In that context, Japan's coastal radar transfer is not random assistance. It fits directly into this wider deterrence architecture. It strengthens surveillance coverage. It enhances ISR integration. It supports a posture built on visibility, documentation, and response readiness. Quiet capabilities that reduce surprise and increase confidence. And honestly, this is the point where things feel different. The Philippines is no longer operating from a position of hoping tensions cool down on their own. It's building capacity, carefully, incrementally, with partners who are clearly committing for the long term. The radar systems are small in scale compared to warships or missile batteries, but strategically, they plug into a bigger shift, one where awareness becomes leverage, and leverage becomes stability. Let's talk about what these radar systems actually do, because sometimes we throw around terms like maritime domain awareness and forget there's very practical muscle behind them. At the most basic level, coastal radar systems detect surface vessels at long range. They pick up movement far beyond what the naked eye can see. A fishing boat, a Coast Guard cutter, a gray-hulled ship loitering just a little too long near a shoal. And once detected, those vessels can be tracked in real time. Speed, heading, pattern of movement, all of it becomes data instead of guesswork. That alone changes the equation. But modern coastal radar isn't operating in isolation. It integrates into command and control systems. It feeds maritime surveillance networks. It plugs into broader ISR architecture, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. In other words, it becomes part of a larger nervous system. One radar site lights up, and the information can flow to naval units, Coast Guard vessels, Air Force ISR aircraft, and command centers almost instantly. And here's where it really matters in the South China Sea context. These systems provide early warning against unauthorized incursions, gray zone operations, and maritime militia presence. Gray zone tactics rely on ambiguity. They rely on plausible deniability. They rely on appearing suddenly, swarming an area, then fading back. Radar makes that harder. It creates records, patterns, evidence. It's not a loud deterrent. It's a quiet exposure. Operationally, the 5 systems expand coverage over critical choke points and disputed waters. That means fewer blind spots. And in maritime competition, blind spots are vulnerabilities. If you can close those gaps, you're already reducing the risk of surprise. They also strengthen coordination across Philippine services. The Navy can respond with greater precision. The Coast Guard can deploy based on verified tracks rather than reports. Air Force ISR assets can be directed more efficiently. Instead of fragmented awareness, you start building a shared operational picture. That shared picture is what modern maritime security depends on. And this isn't only about confrontation. These systems also support humanitarian assistance and disaster response. The Philippines sits in one of the world's most disaster-prone regions. Typhoons, maritime accidents, search and rescue operations, radar coverage can save lives. It improves anti-smuggling and anti-piracy monitoring too. Maritime security is layered. It's not just about rival states, it's about everything moving across those waters. So when we say this is layered defense, that's not a slogan, it's literal. Hardware connected to networks. Networks feeding decisions. Decisions shaping deterrence. The radar systems are nodes in a broader surveillance web that is becoming denser, more integrated, and more resilient. And honestly, that's the quiet revolution here. Not escalation. Not dramatic weapons platforms. Just the steady construction of a network that makes it harder to intimidate, harder to surprise, and harder to operate in the shadows. If you really want to understand why these radars matter, you have to look at Tokyo, not just Manila. Because Japan is not the same Japan it was 10 years ago. In 2022, Tokyo released a new national security strategy that felt like a line in the sand. It wasn't subtle. It committed to doubling defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027, a huge shift for a country that for decades informally capped defense expenditures around 1%. That may sound technical, but in Japanese political culture, it was seismic. It signaled that the era of minimalist security posture was ending. At the same time, Japan expanded flexibility in defense exports. That's important. For years, Tokyo maintained extremely tight restrictions on exporting defense equipment. The new posture loosened those constraints, allowing Japan to support partners more directly, not just through diplomacy, not just through Coast Guard cooperation, but through tangible security assistance. And then came the official security assistance framework in 2023. OSA wasn't just another aid program. It was designed specifically to provide defense equipment to like-minded states, countries that share concerns about regional stability and rule-based maritime order. It marked Japan stepping into a more active security role without abandoning its constitutional constraints. Careful, calculated, but undeniably proactive, the Philippines became the first and most consistent recipient. That's not random. It reflects strategic alignment and, frankly, a high degree of trust. Tokyo does not distribute security assistance casually. The fact that Manila has received OSA support for 3 consecutive years sends a signal, both about the depth of the relationship and about Japan's assessment of where the frontline pressures are in the Indo-Pacific. This is where the broader transition becomes clear. Japan is moving from what many once described as passive pacifism, largely reactive, alliance-dependent, toward proactive deterrence. It is still cautious. It is still disciplined. But it is no longer standing at the sidelines of regional security dynamics. And there's something almost historic about this shift. A country that once defined itself primarily by post-war restraint is now actively shaping the balance of power through partnerships. Not with dramatic shows of force, but through infrastructure, surveillance systems. It's subtle, but it's strategic. The radar transfer to the Philippines is one small piece of that transformation. Yet it captures the essence of Japan's new approach: strengthen partners, build networks, reinforce deterrence early, so crises never escalate to the point where hard power must be used. That's not abandonment of pacifism. It's an adaptation. And in today's Indo-Pacific, adaptation is survival. Something bigger is happening between Manila and Tokyo, and it's not loud, but it's unmistakable. For years, Japan and the Philippines had friendly ties, development aid, Coast Guard vessels, diplomatic warmth. But what we're seeing now feels different. It feels strategic, intentional, almost urgent. Take the Reciprocal Access Agreement. Negotiations have been advancing steadily. If finalized, this would allow troops from both countries to train and operate on each other's soil with fewer bureaucratic hurdles. That's not symbolic cooperation. That's operational access. It signals trust at a very serious level. Countries don't open that door unless they see long-term alignment. Then there's the steady increase in joint exercises between the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force and the Philippine Navy. These aren't photo-op port calls. They involve interoperability drills, coordinated maneuvers, and communications integration. The kind of repetition that builds muscle memory. And when you add regular trilateral exercises with the United States into the mix, you start to see something structured taking shape. Not just partnerships, but a network. And let's be honest about why this is happening. Both Japan and the Philippines face maritime pressure from China. Different geography, same strategic anxiety. Japan deals with tensions in the East China Sea. The Philippines confronts daily friction in the West Philippine Sea. The waters are different, but the pattern feels familiar. Gray zone tactics, Coast Guard presence, maritime militia activity, constant testing of boundaries. Both countries also depend heavily on secure sea lines of communication. Their economies are maritime at their core. Energy imports, trade flows, industrial supply chains. If those sea lanes become unstable, everything else shakes with them. And both governments publicly anchor their strategy in the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific. It's a phrase that sometimes gets overused, but at its heart, it's simple: rules-based order, freedom of navigation, and resistance to coercion. For Tokyo and Manila, that's not an abstract ideology. It's a practical necessity. From Japan's perspective, the Philippines sits on the front line of the South China Sea contest. Geographically exposed, politically vocal, strategically pivotal. Supporting Manila isn't charity, it's forward defense. It's about reinforcing a partner whose stability directly affects regional balance. What stands out to me is how natural this convergence feels now. A decade ago, this level of defense intimacy would have seemed unlikely. Today, it feels almost inevitable. The pressures of geography and power politics have a way of clarifying priorities. Manila and Tokyo aren't forming an alliance in name. But functionally, the alignment is deepening. Quietly, consistently. And in this region, Consistency speaks louder than rhetoric. Let's not pretend Beijing didn't notice this. When Japan transfers defense equipment to the Philippines, especially surveillance systems tied to contested waters, it sends a message. Calm on the surface, sharp underneath. It says Japan is willing to materially support Southeast Asian maritime resilience. Not just through statements, not just through diplomatic concern, but through hardware that changes operational realities. It also quietly tells China that gray zone tactics will not go unmonitored. Maritime militia vessels thrive in ambiguity. Coast Guard pressure campaigns rely on shaping narratives. But when surveillance improves, ambiguity shrinks. Patterns get recorded, incidents get documented, and documentation limits plausible deniability. And maybe most importantly, this move shows that Indo-Pacific coalition building is accelerating, not in the form of a single NATO-style bloc, but through overlapping partnerships. Bilateral here, trilateral there, layer upon layer. For ASEAN, this matters. Other Southeast Asian states are watching closely. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, all maritime actors, all navigating complex relationships with China, all facing varying degrees of pressure in their own waters. If Japan's OSA framework proves effective in strengthening Philippine maritime awareness, it's not unrealistic to expect others to explore similar arrangements. That could gradually reshape Southeast Asia's security architecture, not into an anti-China alliance system, but into a more networked, capacity-driven framework. Japan, in that sense, is emerging as something it hasn't historically been in the region: a stabilizing defense partner, reliable, economically powerful, now increasingly security active. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The Philippines and Japan aren't just defense partners. Their trade volume exceeds $20 billion annually. Japan is consistently one of Manila's top investors, a major infrastructure partner, a leading provider of official development assistance, railways, ports, bridges, industrial zones. Japan has been embedded in Philippine economic development for years. Security cooperation, in that context, doesn't feel disconnected. It feels complementary. Stable sea lanes protect trade. Maritime awareness protects energy imports. Deterrence protects investor confidence. Economic interdependence without security reinforcement leaves vulnerability. But when defense alignment supports economic resilience, the relationship becomes more durable. Honestly, this is what mature strategic partnerships look like. Not just ships and radars, but trade, infrastructure, supply chains, and security are woven together. Looking ahead, this radar transfer may only be the beginning of deeper integration. One likely development is expanded network integration with U.S. systems. If Philippine coastal radars can feed into broader allied surveillance architecture, the operational picture becomes even more comprehensive. Air surveillance upgrades could follow. Maritime patrol aircraft cooperation is possible. Drone-based ISR expansion would not be surprising, especially given cost efficiency and persistent monitoring advantages. And then there's the Reciprocal Access Agreement. If fully signed and implemented, it would formalize operational access and further institutionalize defense ties between Manila and Tokyo. That would mark another structural shift. Long-term, the Philippines appears to be evolving from a reactive posture, responding incident by incident toward layered deterrence. Surveillance, partnerships, access agreements, modernization programs. It's not about provoking conflict. It's about reducing vulnerability. Japan, meanwhile, is cementing its role as a regional security pillar, not replacing the United States, not competing for dominance, but reinforcing the architecture in a way that spreads risk and increases redundancy. Step by step, the Indo-Pacific security system is becoming more multilateral and more interoperable, less dependent on a single axis, more networked. The transfer of 5 coastal radar systems is not symbolic. It is structural. It strengthens Philippine maritime domain awareness. It deepens Japan, Philippine strategic alignment, and it reinforces the broader Indo-Pacific deterrence architecture. We are in an era where gray zone tactics dominate and maritime coercion is routine. In that environment, visibility equals leverage, and leverage equals deterrence. This move is about surveillance, yes, but it's also about sovereignty, about resilience, about shaping regional order before crises spiral beyond control. Sometimes power shifts don't begin with dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they begin with clearer screens, earlier warnings, and fewer blind spots. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion.
Tensions between Tokyo and Beijing continue to simmer after Chinese military jets reportedly locked onto Japanese fighters near Okinawa.
A senior official from Japan's foreign ministry is in China to calm a diplomatic row between the two countries that has been brewing for weeks. It was sparked by the Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, when she said a Chinese attack on Taiwan could threaten Japanese survival.
Japan could deploy its self-defense forces if China invades Taiwan. That's according to Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae.
When Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi declared that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be an emergency for Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea and Japan will support the United States in the defense of Taiwan, she did more than restate a policy position. She crystallized a new strategic era in East Asia. Her statement cuts through decades of ambiguity and signals a historic shift. A Taiwan conflict would not be a local crisis. It would instantly engulf the region's major democracies. Takaichi's words carry weight because of who she is and the moment in which she speaks. Becoming Japan's prime minister in October 2025, she is known for a clear-eyed, hawkish approach to China and unwavering support for Taiwan's security. Building on Shinzo Abe's famous line, "A Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency," she has taken the doctrine further, openly committing Japan to stand alongside the United States in a Taiwan contingency. Few Japanese leaders have spoken with such strategic clarity, and even fewer at a time when China is accelerating military pressure across the first island chain. Beijing's reaction made the significance unmistakable.
全国各族人民传承和弘扬伟大抗战精神。中华民族伟大复兴势不可挡。
Within hours of her comments, China unleashed a wave of diplomatic protests, state media attacks, and economic pressure targeting Japan, including propaganda campaigns invoking Okinawa and narratives portraying Japan as a regional destabilizer.
日方对自身在台湾问题上的立场一再遮遮掩掩、含糊其辞，对将台湾明确归还中国的开罗宣言、波茨坦公告、日本投降书避而不谈，对构成中日关系政治基础的4个政治文件避而不谈，对日本政府坚持一个中国原则的政治承诺避而不谈。
For all the noise, the message behind China's overreaction is simple. Beijing understands that any assault on Taiwan now risks triggering a multi-country emergency, pulling Japan, the US, and potentially other allies into a fast-escalating conflict. Takaichi's doctrine reshapes the strategic equation, and China knows it. The thesis is clear. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would not stop at Taiwan. Japan would face an existential threat and an alliance-defining moment. The Philippines would be exposed on its northern frontier, with EDCA bases and sea lanes turning into immediate targets. South Korea would confront a dual crisis: Chinese aggression to the south and a potential North Korean provocation fueled by chaos. Takaichi is not issuing a theoretical warning. She is articulating a new security reality that the Indo-Pacific must now confront.
一貫しております。その上で、日中間に懸案と課題があるからこそ。
Since there are issues and challenges between Japan and China, I believe we should reduce them and increase understanding and cooperation. Japan remains open to various forms of dialogue with China, We have not closed any doors.
To understand why Prime Minister Takaichi's warning resonates across the Indo-Pacific, one must first understand Taiwan's unique geostrategic position. Taiwan is not just an island, it is the hinge of the entire first island chain, the natural defensive wall stretching from Japan's Okinawa Islands down to the northern Philippines. If China were ever to seize Taiwan, it would not simply change the local balance. It would crack open the gateway to the vast Pacific. A PLA-controlled Taiwan allows Chinese naval and air forces to slip between Okinawa and Taiwan into the Philippine Sea, turning a previously contained coastline into a launch pad for blue water power projection. From there, China could extend military pressure deep into the Bashi Channel and Luzon Strait, the Philippines' northern lifelines, while outflanking the sea lanes South Korea and Japan depend on for energy, food, and trade. Geography alone makes Taiwan the pivot on which regional security turns. But geography is only part of the equation. Taiwan is also the world's most indispensable technological choke point, the so-called Silicon Shield. More than 60% of the world's semiconductors are made in Taiwan, and over 90% of the most advanced chips vital for AI, advanced weapon systems, satellites, telecom networks, and global finance come from a single island. TSMC, Taiwan's industrial titan, holds more than 90% of global advanced node capacity. If a conflict were to halt operations there, the impact would be immediate and catastrophic. Markets would crash, supply chains would freeze, and global militaries, including those of Japan, the US, and South Korea, would face unprecedented constraints. In this sense, Taiwan is not merely a strategic location. It is the beating technological heart of the modern world. History provides a preview of what is at stake. During the 1995-96 Taiwan Strait crisis, China fired test missiles near Taiwan and conducted large-scale exercises. Even these limited actions were enough to rattle global markets, trigger emergency alliance consultations, and prompt Washington to deploy 2 carrier strike groups to stabilize the situation. And that was in an era before global economies became deeply dependent on Taiwanese chips. A full-scale invasion in the 2020s, with today's interlocked supply chains and semiconductor reliance, would not be a regional disturbance. It would be a global shockwave. This is why leaders from Tokyo to Manila to Seoul increasingly describe a Taiwan conflict as an emergency, not a distant or isolated issue. The stakes are too high, the geography too vital, and the economic consequences too vast for any regional power to remain untouched. Japan does not view a Taiwan crisis as a distant geopolitical event. It sees it as a direct threat to national survival. The geography alone makes neutrality impossible. Yonaguni Island sits barely 100 kilometers from Taiwan, and the Okinawa archipelago hosts some of the most important U.S. military bases in the Pacific, including Kadena Air Base and Futenma. In any Chinese invasion of Taiwan, Japanese airspace and maritime zones would immediately be pressured. PLA missiles, fighters, and naval vessels would either cross or skirt Japan's air defense identification zones, forcing constant intercepts and heightening the risk of miscalculation. Worse, if China chooses to strike U.S. bases in Japan, a plausible scenario in any Taiwan contingency, Japan's post-2015 security laws would obligate Tokyo to exercise collective self-defense. In other words, geography ensures that Japan is already inside the battle space before a single decision is made in Tokyo. This perception did not begin with Prime Minister Takaichi. It builds on a decade of evolving strategic thought. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe famously declared, "A Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency, and therefore an emergency for the Japan-US alliance." But while Abe's line served as a warning, Takaichi has transformed it into doctrine. Her position is not abstract. She has publicly stated that Japan will support the United States militarily if Taiwan is attacked. This transition, from conditional rhetoric to explicit commitment, marks the sharpest articulation of Japan's Taiwan policy in modern history. Under Takaichi, Tokyo is no longer hinting at involvement. It is preparing for it. Japan's growing military capabilities reinforce this shift. Tokyo is on track to reach 2% of GDP in defense spending, which would make it the world's third largest defense budget, surpassing Russia. This investment is not symbolic. Japan is acquiring long-range strike missiles capable of hitting ships and bases far from its shores, expanding integrated air and missile defense systems designed to counter China's rocket force, and conducting joint operational planning with the United States, specifically for a Taiwan scenario. These steps show a nation systematically preparing for a conflict that could redefine the Indo-Pacific balance of power. The stakes became clear during the 2025 China-Japan diplomatic crisis. After Takaichi reiterated her willingness to defend Taiwan, Beijing launched a fierce political backlash. Propaganda campaigns questioning Japanese sovereignty over Okinawa, diplomatic threats, and targeted economic pressure. Rather than isolate Takaichi, the pressure affirmed her point. China itself now assumes Japan will not stay neutral in a Taiwan conflict. When Beijing overreacts, it is a sign that the strategic calculus has fundamentally shifted.
Japan has moved from describing a Taiwan contingency as merely serious to recognizing it as existential. Under Takaichi, the era of ambiguity is over. For the Philippines, a Taiwan conflict is not a distant flashpoint. It is a frontline emergency from the very first hour. The geography makes this unavoidable. Northern Luzon and the Batanes Islands sit directly beneath Taiwan, separated only by the narrow waters of the Bashi Channel and Luzon Strait. Any clash between the PLA, US, and Japan would unfold across these same waters, placing the Philippines inside the battle space by sheer proximity. Philippine airspace and exclusive economic zone would be vulnerable to military overflight, missile trajectories, electronic warfare, and naval maneuvering. Even without a direct attack, Manila would face the immediate risks of blockade spillover, disrupted sea lanes, and militarized activity around its northern maritime approaches. Geography ensures that a Taiwan contingency instantly becomes a Philippine contingency.
This exposure is reinforced by the country's treaty infrastructure, particularly the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA. First signed in 2014, EDCA initially expanded U.S. access to 5 sites, but its 2023 expansion to 9 locations, including bases in northern Luzon and Palawan, effectively knitted the Philippines into the operational architecture of a Taiwan defense plan. The build-out is real. Runways are being extended, fuel depots are being added, radars upgraded, and pre-positioned equipment stockpiled. A recent U.S. report and congressional proposal even suggested Taiwan helping fund upgrades to Philippine bases, explicitly for contingencies involving a Taiwan crisis. These developments show that the Philippines is no longer a passive observer. It is becoming one of the primary logistical and operational hubs for U.S. and allied response scenarios.
Beyond strategy, the Philippines faces a profound human emergency in the event of a Taiwan war. More than 170,000 Filipinos live and work in Taiwan, forming one of the island's largest migrant communities. The Philippines' 2023 to 2028 national security policy identifies their safety as a top priority in any cross-strait escalation. A conflict would trigger an enormous evacuation and humanitarian challenge, disrupt billions of pesos in remittances, and create immediate domestic pressure on the government to act. This demographic reality turns a Taiwan invasion from a geopolitical concern into a direct social and economic crisis that touches Filipino families nationwide. Manila's policy evolution reflects this understanding. Recent analyses by the Lowy Institute and local security think tanks emphasize that China's threats to Taiwan and its coercion in the West Philippine Sea are interconnected problems. The Philippines no longer sees these as separate theaters. It views them as 2 fronts shaped by a single strategic actor. This is why Manila has increased joint exercises with the US and Japan, accelerated EDCA construction, and strengthened basing in northern Luzon. Like Prime Minister Takaichi, Philippine policymakers increasingly recognize that Taiwan's fate has a direct and immediate bearing on Philippine security. In practice, and increasingly in doctrine, Manila is aligning with the logic that a Taiwan emergency is inevitably a Philippine emergency too. South Korea rarely features in public debates about a Taiwan conflict, but Seoul increasingly acknowledges that the island's fate is tied directly to its own national security. Senior South Korean officials have stated openly that stability in the Taiwan Strait has a direct impact on South Korea's national interest, a position reinforced in multiple joint U.S. ROK statements, emphasizing the need to maintain peace in the Strait. This is a significant shift for a country traditionally cautious about provoking Beijing. It reflects a deeper strategic realization. A Taiwan crisis would reverberate across the Korean peninsula within hours, not weeks. Seoul now understands that the shockwaves of conflict in the Taiwan Strait would not sweep around Korea, they would hit Korea first.
The greatest challenge South Korea faces is what analysts call the dual contingency problem. In a Taiwan war, South Korea's most important role may not be deploying forces toward Taiwan, but deterring North Korea from launching an opportunistic attack while U.S. forces redeploy southward. Multiple studies warn that China and North Korea could coordinate pressure, forcing Washington to divide its military attention between defending Taiwan and stabilizing the Korean peninsula. For Seoul, this scenario is deeply dangerous. A Taiwan conflict could turn North Korea into a second front, even if South Korea itself takes no provocative action. The logic is simple but brutal. If Taiwan burns, Korea must brace. Economically, South Korea is more exposed than almost any other U.S. ally. As one of the world's leading semiconductor producers, South Korea is intertwined with Taiwan's chip ecosystem, sharing supply chains, manufacturing equipment, and markets. A disruption in Taiwan would reverberate immediately through Korean tech giants like Samsung and SK Hynix.
Beyond chips, South Korea's energy imports and trade routes pass through the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, making them vulnerable to blockades, missile coverage, or naval militarization. Even a limited conflict would jolt Korean financial markets and threaten its export-driven economy. For a country whose prosperity is built on stable sea lanes and global trade, a Taiwan war is not a peripheral issue. It is a direct economic threat. A Taiwan invasion would destabilize the entire Indo-Pacific, triggering crises that no regional power can avoid.
South Korea may not be the loudest voice in cross-strait debates, but it stands on the quiet front line of a conflict that could reshape the peninsula, the alliance structure, and the economic foundations of Northeast Asia. Prime Minister Takaichi's declaration that Japan will support the United States in the defense of Taiwan is not symbolic rhetoric. It is grounded in the legal and operational architecture Japan has spent a decade building. Under Japan's post-2015 security laws, Tokyo can exercise collective self-defense when two conditions are met: an ally is attacked and Japan's survival is threatened. A Chinese strike on U.S. forces operating from Japanese bases during a Taiwan contingency meets both thresholds unambiguously. In such a scenario, the fight would not be happening over there. It would be occurring from Japanese soil, across Japanese airspace, and directly threatening the safety and continuity of the Japanese state.
This legal framework turns Takaichi's statement from a political message into a binding strategic trajectory.
In practical terms, Japan's support would be decisive. The United States would rely heavily on access to its bases in Okinawa, Kyushu, and mainland Japan for air operations, maritime patrols, refueling, repair, and logistics. Japan would simultaneously provide integrated air and missile defense, shielding both its own population and U.S. forces from PLA ballistic and cruise missile attacks. Japanese maritime self-defense force destroyers would conduct escort missions, anti-submarine warfare patrols, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations throughout the East China Sea and Philippine Sea. Far from sending troops directly into combat over Taiwan, Japan's real contribution would be enabling the U.S. to fight at all, keeping sea lanes open, protecting bases, and ensuring the joint force can operate under fire.
These assumptions are not speculative. They are backed by years of U.S. war games and naval analyses.
Repeated studies, including those published by the U.S. Naval Institute and major defense think tanks, conclude that a U.S. defense of Taiwan is extremely difficult, if not impossible, without Japanese basing access, logistics depth, and coordinated operations. Japan is the unsinkable aircraft carrier that anchors the northern flank of the first island chain. Takaichi's public endorsement of this role transforms what used to be an unspoken assumption of strategists into declared policy, which explains the ferocity of Beijing's diplomatic backlash. China understands the implication. If it attacks Taiwan, it will not just face Taiwan, it will face a US-Japan operational machine designed to fight as one.
I did not have the opportunity to communicate with Chinese Premier Li Qiang.
Prime Minister Takaichi's argument rests on a simple but unavoidable truth. The security of East Asia is integrated, and the consequences of a Taiwan invasion would ripple instantly across Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea. For Japan, the loss of Taiwan would place the PLA directly on its doorstep, shattering the first island chain and exposing Okinawa and the Ryukyus to unprecedented pressure. For the Philippines, a Taiwan conflict would militarize the Luzon Strait within hours,
threatening the country's northern provinces, endangering over 170,000 Filipino workers in Taiwan, and jeopardizing maritime trade routes vital to the Philippine economy. For South Korea, a war in the Taiwan Strait would generate a dangerous dual-front scenario. The risk of North Korean opportunism combined with a massive economic shock to its semiconductor-driven, export-dependent economy. Seen together, the picture is not regional, it is systemic.
Takaichi's logic also fits the structure of America's alliance network. U.S. security commitments in Asia are not isolated treaties. They are interlinked pillars of a single deterrence architecture. A failure to uphold commitments in one theater, Taiwan, would undermine credibility in all others. The U.S.-Japan alliance, the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, and the U.S.-ROK alliance. This is precisely the danger Shinzo Abe warned of when he said that a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency, and Takaichi is now extending that warning across the region. If the U.S. falters in defending Taiwan, the strategic foundations of Asia's security order begin to crumble, and every ally knows it. The bottom line is clear. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan is not merely Taipei's problem. It is a joint emergency that would immediately activate Japanese and American responses and inevitably pull in Manila and Seoul.
Takaichi's position codifies what military planners and intelligence analysts have long understood. Taiwan sits at the center of a networked security system, and its fall would trigger cascading crises that no U.S. ally in East Asia could escape. Her statement is not provocative. It is a rare moment of strategic honesty. And the line that captures this new era best, the one you can use to close your video or article, is this. In the 2020s, the question is no longer whether a Taiwan war would be everyone's crisis. It's whether Asian democracies admit it openly and prepare together. Takaichi's statement does exactly that.
If you like the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.
We head overseas to the fast-moving changes in Ukraine, signaling the Russians appear to have won this round, taking control of their prize, Crimea.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has reiterated his territorial claims to Taiwan, saying unification is inevitable.
You wake up to the breaking news that Taiwan didn't fall in a long war, it was taken in a long weekend. No declaration, no countdown, just a sudden, irreversible shift in reality. The question isn't, would China try? The question is sharper and more uncomfortable. If Beijing pulls a Crimea-style move on Taiwan, who reacts fast enough and who gets trapped by the fallout? This is why the region is on edge right now. China's latest drills aren't just military exercises. They're rehearsals for confusion, multi-zone, multi-domain, wrapped in the language of deterrence and foreign interference. Taiwan answers by signaling readiness and resolve, but everyone around the island is already doing the math. This isn't about choosing sides anymore. It's about proximity, timing, and consequences that hit before diplomats even book flights. Start with the Philippines. Over 100,000 Filipinos live and work in Taiwan. Caregivers, factory workers, families with kids. If something snaps, Manila's first problem isn't ideology. It's evacuation, airspace access, ports, and whether nearby bases suddenly become critical lifelines or liabilities. Japan's dilemma is even starker. Look at a map. Yonaguni Island sits barely more than 100 kilometers from Taiwan. Neutrality sounds nice in theory, but geography doesn't negotiate. That's why Japan has been hardening its southwest defenses, and why a former prime minister could openly say, a Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency. That line wasn't rhetoric, it was a warning. Then zoom out. South Korea watches all this with a different fear.
Not invasion, but entanglement. A Taiwan crisis could pull US forces, stretch regional defenses, and force Seoul to prepare for pressure on the Korean peninsula at the worst possible moment. Different countries, different anxieties, but the same realization. A Crimea-style takeover wouldn't stay local. It would redraw risk maps overnight, force rapid decisions under uncertainty, and test whether Indo-Pacific alliances are built for speed or just for statements. That's the real tension here. Not tanks versus missiles, but time versus hesitation. And in a region where distance is measured in minutes, not miles, hesitation may be the most dangerous move of all. Before anyone talks about Taiwan, policymakers quietly replay one precedent: Crimea, 2014. Not because the geography matches, but because the method did. What shocked the world back then was not raw firepower, it was speed. Events moved so quickly that by the time statements were drafted and emergency meetings convened, the map had already changed. The Crimea method followed a cold, efficient logic. First came speed and surprise, a fait accompli engineered before diplomacy could even warm up. Then ambiguity, masked forces, proxies, and just enough deniability to slow consensus among outside powers. This was paired with information dominance, flooding the space with conflicting narratives to blur what was happening in real time.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has told a special session of Russia's parliament that Crimea has always been a part of Russia.
Add legal fog, referendums and selective appeals to self-determination, and the move gained a thin veneer of procedural legitimacy. Finally, there was sanctions tolerance. Moscow calculated correctly that it could absorb economic punishment long enough to lock in territorial gains. Here's the uncomfortable lesson decision-makers took away. Sanctions didn't reverse the map. They imposed costs. They isolated Russia diplomatically. But they did not undo the seizure, certainly not quickly. When an aggressor is prepared to endure isolation and economic pain, punitive measures alone rarely force an immediate rollback. By the time pressure builds, reality has already hardened. This is where the comparison to Taiwan becomes urgent and where it also breaks down.
The peace of the Taiwan Strait is crucial to the global economy and the tech industry's development. Any conflict will inevitably trigger worldwide sanctions.
Taiwan is not Crimea. It sits astride critical sea and air routes, anchors the first island chain, and lies at the heart of global high-end technology supply chains. Any attempt to replicate a Crimea-style move here would not just redraw borders, it would disrupt trade flows, military balances, and industrial systems worldwide. That difference raises the stakes, but it doesn't invalidate the method. The warning embedded in Crimea is simple and unsettling. The fastest move often matters more than the strongest argument. And that is precisely why capitals from Tokyo to Manila study 2014 so closely. Not to relive it, but to ensure they are not caught reacting to a new reality that has already been decided. At first glance, the parallels are unsettling. Crimea in 2014 showed how power can move quietly before anyone agrees on what is happening. The playbook relied on gray zone pressure rather than open invasion, legal narratives instead of declarations, speed instead of scale. That logic still applies. Around Taiwan, similar tools already exist. Coast guards instead of navies, law enforcement instead of soldiers, information dominance instead of firepower. The goal is not immediate conquest, but rapid consolidation, to make the situation feel settled before the world has time to argue. What made Crimea work was not brute force. It was ambiguity. Masked actors, contested narratives, and procedural theater slowed outside response just enough. That is the part of the model that translates most easily. It buys time, and in crises, time is everything. This is where comparisons become dangerous if taken too far. Crimea was continental. Taiwan is an island that forces any aggressor into air and sea denial contests from the first hour. Crimea sat on Europe's periphery. Taiwan sits on the main arteries of global trade. Most critically, Crimea was not embedded in a dense alliance network prepared for immediate spillover. Taiwan is. The security architecture linking the United States and Japan is far deeper than Western commitments to Ukraine were in 2014. Geography reinforces that reality. Japan's southwest islands lie so close to Taiwan that neutrality becomes more slogan than strategy. This isn't ideology, it's physics. Then there's the economy. The Taiwan Strait is a major shipping corridor, with one widely cited estimate noting around 44% of the world's container fleet moved through it in 2022. Taiwan also dominates advanced semiconductor production capacity, not total chips, but the cutting edge that modern economies depend on. Even conservative estimates show the shock of disruption would be global and immediate. In this scenario, events move faster than coordination. It begins quietly. Cyber disruption, electronic interference, psychological pressure on leadership and society.
A war between China and Taiwan is already well underway. Chinese cyber attacks on the territory have reached an unprecedented scale. Millions are detected each day.
Then comes a quarantine, a blockade light framed as customs enforcement or law and order activity. Key ports, airfields, and communications nodes are seized with minimal spectacle. Political pressure follows quickly, pushing for capitulation before resistance can organize. Governance is installed, and bargaining begins from a position of control.
到目前为止，它还不够这个实力嘛。但是我们不以此为自满，就是我刚刚有提到，我们要持续增加我们的防护力量，我们要持续提高我们这个豪猪的力道。
The world reacts, but cautiously. Condemnations arrive. Emergency summits convene. Sanctions and export controls roll out. Capital tightens. Shipping insurance spikes. A recognition battle unfolds at the UN and in major capitals. The hardest question hangs unresolved. Does anyone try to reverse the new reality once it hardens? For Japan, this scenario is less about choice than exposure. Hosting major US forces makes base and rear area operations immediately relevant. Missile and air defense posture intensifies across the southwest island chain. Tokyo accelerates movement toward integrated deterrence and counterstrike readiness, not as a declaration of war, but as a signal that escalation will not be cheap. Local debates around islands like Yonaguni already show Japan is planning for spillover long before headlines force the issue. For the Philippines, the first priority is human, not abstract, protecting citizens. More than 100,000 Filipinos live and work in Taiwan. Evacuation routes, airspace access, and port readiness become urgent realities. The second priority is territorial defense, especially around the Luzon Strait and the West Philippine Sea. Third comes alliance-enabled support, logistics, surveillance, and intelligence through EDCA sites, even if Manila avoids direct combat framing. Geography ensures involvement whether it is desired or not. Here, the plan unravels early. Intelligence leaks expose intent. Taiwan mobilizes sooner than expected. Partners surge ISR and visible presence. Markets react instantly. Shipping disruption and capital panic arrive before control is established. What was meant to be ambiguous becomes unmistakable. The escalation ladder activates. A quarantine turns into interception. Interception risks strikes. Costs pile up faster than gains. Japan accelerates operational coordination and missile defense readiness. The Philippines finds EDCA sites suddenly central for surveillance, refueling, logistics, and humanitarian response. Diplomatically, coalition building widens beyond Washington to include Australia and select European partners. Time, once an ally, becomes a liability. This is the least dramatic and the most stabilizing outcome. Taiwan denies speed. Command and control is hardened. Government continuity is preserved. Air defense is distributed. Anti-ship capabilities are made survivable. Ports and airfields are repaired as fast as they are damaged. Civil defense reduces panic and sustains resilience. The objective is not to win a decisive battle. It is to make every step slow, visible, and expensive. As time stretches, political returns shrink. Coalition support grows because diplomacy and logistics have room to function. The crisis remains severe, but it does not collapse into fait accompli. 2027 is not a prediction. It is a planning reference widely used to mark anticipated PLA capability maturation. Governments take it seriously because preparedness signals are already visible. Taiwan's defense spending trajectory reflects this mindset.
with 2025 spending planned at roughly about $20.25 billion, around 2.45% of GDP, alongside political pushes for higher future targets. The emphasis is readiness, not inevitability. Taiwan's strategy is deterrence by denial. Asymmetric sea denial through mines and mobile anti-ship missiles, air-based survivability and dispersed operations, stockpiles of ammunition, fuel, and spares, civil defense readiness, and information resilience to blunt psychological pressure. Taiwan's goal is not to match China ship for ship, it's to deny a quick win. Washington operates through three toolkits: militarily, forward presence, ISR, air-sea denial, and cyber capabilities; economically, sanctions, export controls, and financial restrictions; politically, coalition leadership, basing access, logistics coordination, and diplomatic unity. Trilateral signaling with Japan and the Philippines has already affirmed the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, framing the issue as systemic rather than bilateral. Tokyo's posture has shifted toward the Southwest Islands, integrated deterrence, and accelerated capability development, with a widely reported policy direction toward around 2% of GDP in defense spending by 2027. Japan isn't planning for war, it's planning to ensure war is not cheap. Geography is destiny. The Luzon Strait makes spillover unavoidable. Airspace, sea lanes, and evacuation routes intersect here. EDCA sites in northern Luzon and Palawan matter for logistics, ISR, and humanitarian response. At the same time, Manila must balance alliance cooperation with escalation sensitivity and domestic politics, a constraint that shapes every decision. Regionally, alliances harden and arms racing accelerates. Globally, shipping insurance spikes, trade reroutes, and advanced technology supply chains fracture. Normatively, a successful fait accompli becomes a template, signaling that speed and ambiguity still work. What lowers risk is not rhetoric, but preparation. Faster allied decision-making, persistent ISR, pre-positioned logistics, resilient civil defense in Taiwan, and credible economic deterrence packages prepared in advance. If Taiwan is taken quickly, the region inherits a new reality. For deep analysis of contemporary issues.
Chinese fighter jets and warships have simulated strikes on Taiwan.
对日方近期的军事安全动向严重关切。
China has summoned the Japanese ambassador over comments made by his Prime Minister on Taiwan.
If there is a confrontation over Taiwan between China and the United States, there is no way that the Philippines can stay out of it, simply because of our physical geographic location.
What if China tried to cut off Taiwan's sea lanes tomorrow, or even launched a full-scale invasion? Could Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines realistically stop Beijing? Or would they be dragged into a high-stakes showdown with global consequences? The Taiwan Strait has become a powder keg. China is rapidly modernizing its navy, missile forces, and gray zone tactics, while Tokyo, Seoul, and Manila quietly ramp up defenses, deepen alliances, and sharpen their military edge. History offers a chilling parallel. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, a small island became the center of the world's attention, where the US and USSR came dangerously close to war, showing how geography, alliances, and readiness can tip the balance between deterrence and disaster. Today, the Indo-Pacific faces a similar test. Let's break down the geography, military capabilities, alliances, and operational realities to explore whether these three nations can impose enough cost to deter China, or if the region is on the brink of a crisis that could spiral far beyond Taiwan.
代表全体与会人员。
Taiwan sits at the center of regional tension because it's a thriving democracy, a global chip hub, and a gateway to vital sea lanes. All reasons China sees reunification or coercion as essential.
也是台湾光复80周年。日方若不深刻汲取历史教训，胆敢铤而走险，甚至武力介入台海局势，必将在中国人民解放军的铜墙铁壁面前碰得头破血流，付出惨痛代价。
And with Beijing ramping up naval patrols, air sorties, and gray zone pressure throughout 2024-25, the possibility of a real crisis has become far more believable. What if China suddenly tried to blockade Taiwan, or even launch a full-scale invasion? Could anyone stop it? How would Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines respond if the Strait became a flashpoint overnight? Let's break down the scenarios that could push the region to the brink of war.
导弹4点钟的，导弹4点钟。
The most likely near-term scenario is a coercive blockade, where China uses its Navy, Coast Guard, and maritime militia to tighten an air-sea cordon around Taiwan without launching a full invasion. In response, Japan and the Philippines would move to protect key sea routes. South Korea might support from the sidelines with submarines and intelligence, and the US would ramp up surveillance and logistics. This would create a tense standoff marked by escorted supply runs, rising diplomatic pressure, and major economic disruptions, but still stop short of an all-out attack. In a second scenario, China carries out limited missile strikes on Taiwan's critical infrastructure, such as ports and radar sites, while grabbing nearby maritime features. Japan would likely step in with missile defense and might even intercept or answer attacks, while South Korea contributes intelligence and undersea deterrence. The Philippines would support through basing access and enhanced monitoring. This kind of move could act as a sharp warning shot or a carefully staged step toward more serious coercion.
Do not be content with securing just the northern hemisphere up to Mavulis Island. Start planning for actions in case there is an invasion of Taiwan.
In the most extreme scenario, China launches a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, combining amphibious landings with heavy air, sea, and missile support. Japan would project its naval and missile forces forward. South Korea would send submarines and maritime strike assets. And the Philippines would serve as a crucial rear area hub for logistics, intelligence, and base access. This is the highest risk scenario, one that would almost certainly pull in US forces, widen the conflict, and put the strength of regional alliances to the ultimate test. South Korea is rapidly emerging as a major defense heavyweight, driven by fast industrial growth and increasingly ambitious naval plans. Its armed forces are large, well-funded, and backed by a defense budget that continues to climb sharply. Between 2021 and 2025, Seoul invested over $200 billion into defense, with more increases planned for 2025-26. This money is fueling advanced shipbuilding programs, submarine expansion, including long-term interest in nuclear propulsion, and a wider modernization push aimed at strengthening South Korea's role in regional security. A key part of this buildup is the country's growing capability mix: modern surface combatants, a powerful submarine fleet, high-end missile and air defense systems, and sophisticated electronic warfare tools. South Korea's defense industry, led by giants like Hanwha and Hyundai, is capable of producing world-class platforms quickly and at scale, making Seoul a major contributor to any long-term regional denial strategy. Its KSS-3 Jangyeongsil-class submarines, equipped with vertical launch systems and advanced batteries, stand out as some of the most capable conventional submarines in Asia. Even so, South Korea faces practical limitations. It sits north of Taiwan, far from the front line compared to Japan or the Philippines, and it must always balance its commitments with the ongoing threat from North Korea. Sudden demands to surge forces southward during a Taiwan crisis could strain its logistics and industrial capacity. Still, its growing undersea force, advanced missiles, and cutting-edge shipbuilding gives Seoul strategic depth that makes it an essential, if sometimes underappreciated, part of the wider Indo-Pacific security archipelago. By 2025, South Korea is also pushing hard into AI, unmanned systems, and next-generation military technologies. This shift aims to transform its armed forces into a more agile, smart force, enhancing everything from missile defense to multi-domain operations. With its rising budget, modern platforms, and booming defense industry, South Korea is becoming one of the most capable and technologically sophisticated players in the region, far more central to a potential Taiwan contingency than many analysts realize. Japan plays a central role in any Taiwan scenario because of its world-class navy, expanding defense budget, and prime geography just north of Taiwan. Its position near crucial choke points in the East China Sea gives Japan the natural ability to project surveillance, naval power, and reinforcement missions into the region. This is why analysts often call Japan the northern anchor of Indo-Pacific defense planning. With growing investments in unmanned systems, submarines, and long-range surveillance, Japan is steadily strengthening that role.
Tokyo's modernization drive has only accelerated. In 2025, Japan approved a record 8.7 trillion yen defense budget to boost strike capability and missile defense, most notably by deploying US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles. Its navy is also expanding with next-generation Aegis-equipped destroyers, signaling a shift from defensive posture to a more forward, proactive presence. This allows Japan to sustain pressure on Chinese forces, defend key maritime corridors, and support allied operations across the region. Japan's high-end military ecosystem reinforces this momentum. It is integrating space-based sensors, unmanned platforms, and its maritime forces into a powerful ISR network for early warning and precision targeting. The shift away from the canceled Aegis Ashore program towards sea-based missile defense highlights Tokyo's focus on flexibility and mobility. Altogether, Japan has the capability to deny China control of vital waters, protect supply routes, and bolster allied logistics, all while expanding its defense industrial base. The Philippines sits in one of the most important locations in the entire Indo-Pacific, the southern gateway to Taiwan. Controlling the Luzon Strait, Manila's geography gives it enormous influence over any future blockade, resupply mission, or allied reinforcement effort. This makes the Philippines a natural staging point for logistics, surveillance, and forward operations in a Taiwan crisis, something no other regional partner can replicate. In recent years, the Philippines has taken real steps to strengthen its defense posture through the revised AFP Modernization Act. Its Navy and Air Force are gradually improving with newer patrol vessels, upgraded radars, drones, and stronger maritime domain awareness. The country's alliance structure is also deepening. The Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, with Japan, along with expanded EDCA access for the U.S., allows allied forces to train, rotate, and operate from Philippine bases, turning the archipelago into a flexible strategic platform. Despite these gains, Manila still faces major limitations. It lacks deep strike capability, has minimal anti-submarine warfare assets, and remains vulnerable to Chinese blockade pressure. Its modernization timeline also trails far behind China's rapid military growth. Even so, the Philippines' geography, alliance commitments, and improving capabilities give it outsized strategic value. In any Taiwan contingency, it would serve as a crucial deterrent partner, a logistics hub, and a frontline state that helps legitimize regional allied action. U.S. support acts as a major force multiplier for Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, with American rotational forces, EDCA basing access, and advanced ISR and strike assets boosting their collective deterrence. Close intelligence sharing, joint surveillance, and expanded multilateral exercises allow the allies to detect and challenge any Chinese blockade or power projection, tightening their ability to operate together in real-world contingencies. In recent years, the US, Japan, and the Philippines have built a much stronger security partnership. Exercises like Sama-Sama 2025 show how these countries are now training together in ways that prepare them for real-world crises. The new Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, between Japan and the Philippines makes this cooperation even more formal, giving both sides the ability to rotate forces, train together, and share logistics.
With the US providing major support, the three countries are forming a united front that can push back against Chinese pressure. The region's security network goes beyond just these three countries. South Korea is strengthening its own military posture with its three-axis deterrence system, while partnerships among the Quad members and even NATO countries are slowly expanding into Asia.
This wider cooperation matters because, in a crisis like a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, several countries, including Japan, Australia, the Philippines, and some European allies, could take part in a coordinated naval response.
We're always prepared for eventualities and what may or may not happen to ensure we're strongly postured. And working with our partners in the Philippines, I think that's what you're referring to mostly. We've got lots of options and lots of capabilities in the region, but ultimately we're not going to reveal precisely what we may or may not do.
Still, these alliances face real limits. Japan continues to debate its constitutional restrictions and how far it can go in collective defense. South Korea must balance its desire for more military independence with the need to stay closely aligned with the US. And the Philippines has to weigh the risks of escalation with China against its economic and political interests. The overall message is clear. The regional alliance system is growing stronger, but it needs consistent political commitment and trust to hold together in a crisis.
China's most likely move against Taiwan would be a naval blockade, since Taiwan depends heavily on ships for food and energy. In that scenario, Japan to the north and the Philippines to the south become extremely important. With US surveillance aircraft and Philippine bases, they can help keep supply routes open. South Korea's submarines and missile systems would also make Chinese naval operations much riskier. Together, their combined presence would force China to pay a high price for trying to cut Taiwan off. All of this only works if the region stays connected through strong radar, missile defense, and logistics. Japan's Aegis systems, South Korea's advanced sensors, and the Philippines' coastal radars create a shared early warning network, boosted by US intelligence. But the alliance also needs reliable bases and supplies to keep going in a long conflict. Japan and the Philippines can offer key logistics hubs, yet those bases could come under attack and resupply missions might be contested. Strengthening submarine production, building more destroyers, and stockpiling fuel and munitions will be essential to actually sustain any defense of Taiwan. Even with Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines becoming stronger, China still holds big advantages. Its massive industrial base lets it build ships, missiles, and submarines far faster than any country in the region. China also uses gray zone tactics, like Coast Guard intimidation and maritime militia, to pressure neighbors without starting a full war. On top of that, its anti-access missile systems and expanding carrier fleet make it harder for other countries to intervene. In a long conflict, China's ability to replace losses quickly gives it a major edge. But the countries working to counter China have their own internal limits. Japan is upgrading rapidly, yet political debates and its pacifist constitution slow things down. South Korea wants to build a powerful, independent military, but it has to juggle costs, its alliance with the US, and the risk of angering China. The Philippines, meanwhile, has neither submarines nor long-range missiles, and still relies heavily on its allies to defend its bases and coastline during a Taiwan crisis. All of this means one thing: the entire regional defense network depends heavily on the United States. Without strong US military presence, industrial power, and political commitment, the deterrence strategy weakens fast. Keeping this system stable would require not just joint planning, but serious long-term investment and shared risk, something that's tough for any group of countries to maintain during a major crisis. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines each bring different strengths to a Taiwan crisis. But they also face major limits compared to China. Japan and the Philippines sit on opposite sides of Taiwan, giving them key geographic positions to support resupply routes, while South Korea adds submarine power and industrial capacity. Together, they offer advanced systems like submarines, missile defenses, and surveillance, while the Philippines provides bases and regional access for allies. But China still holds big advantages in sheer numbers: more ships, more missiles, more carriers, and a much larger production capacity. If a crisis erupts, China could choose from several options: a limited blockade to choke Taiwan's supplies, targeted assaults on key islands or ports, or a full-scale invasion that would require overwhelming air and sea control.
Each scenario carries its own risks, but China's growing military power makes all of them increasingly plausible. In a Taiwan crisis, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines would respond in ways that play to their strengths. Japan would raise readiness, deploy its Navy and Air Force to patrol the northern approaches, and increase surveillance while supporting allied operations, possibly easing rules on collective defense. South Korea would push more submarines and surveillance assets from the north, boost munitions production, and coordinate closely with the U.S. Though it must be careful about provoking China or North Korea, the Philippines would focus on providing bases, resupply corridors, and coastal monitoring, using its Navy and Coast Guard to contest gray zone activity and rally multilateral support. Together, they would form a layered deterrent. Japan and South Korea provide advanced combat power and sustainment. The Philippines gives geographic access and legitimacy. And the U.S. remains the central enabler, with allies like Australia, the UK, and NATO partners likely providing diplomatic, economic, and limited military support. In the shadow of China's growing military might, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines are no longer on the sidelines. Their geographic advantages, modernizing militaries, and alliance ties give them a credible role in deterring a Taiwan contingency. But deterrence will only hold if it's backed by real capabilities, continuous coordination, and political resolve. China still enjoys deep advantages in industrial capacity, missile stockpiles, and manpower. The alliance's challenge is to impose a cost structure that makes coercion or invasion unattractive. That means turning threats into deterrence through combined military strength, logistical readiness, and diplomatic unity. In essence, yes, they can deter, but only if they commit, invest, and coordinate like their very survival depends on it. And in an era where the balance of power is shifting, that commitment may very well be the difference between a cold standoff and a crisis uncontained. If you like the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.
Now the Philippine Navy is sending a team to Tokyo to inspect 6 used destroyers that Japan is offering to transfer.
Coast Guard personnel from Japan, the US, and the Philippines have held their second ever joint exercises near Japan's south.
Japan and the Philippines have signed a landmark security pact, which will allow for the deployment of troops on each other's soil for both training purposes and other operations.
For the first time in modern Asian geopolitics, Japan and the Philippines, 2 U.S. allies with very different histories and defense traditions, have entered a legally binding military pact that allows their troops, ships, and aircraft to operate on each other's soil. It is a dramatic evolution, something almost unthinkable a decade ago, yet it is now happening at speed. Japanese forces can deploy to Philippine bases, and Philippine units can train in Japan, forming a defense architecture that directly challenges Beijing's assumptions about regional dominance. Their cooperation is accelerating, China is reacting with sharper maritime aggression, and the region is tightening around a new strategic question. Can this emerging Tokyo-Manila partnership truly deter China's expanding power? This question matters now more than ever. Chinese coercion in the South China Sea has grown bolder, turning routine patrols into violent confrontations as Philippine vessels are struck with water cannons, rammed at close range, and jammed by electronic interference. In the East China Sea, Japanese forces are facing their own pressure around the Senkaku Islands, while Tokyo positions missiles and surveillance systems in preparation for any conflict that may spill from the Taiwan Strait. Manila has already acknowledged that it cannot remain on the sidelines if Taiwan is attacked. Geography alone forces it into the center of any crisis. And as tensions mount on every front, the Philippines has shifted rapidly from decades of internal security operations to its first real external defense posture in the modern era. Japan and the Philippines now find themselves linked not just by treaties, but by shared vulnerabilities, shared strategic fears, and an increasingly aligned sense of urgency. Their cooperation is bolstered by the United States, which sees both countries as anchors of its Indo-Pacific strategy.
Our alliance has never been stronger. Our mutual defense treaty is the bedrock of that. We share concerns about China's coercion in the South China Sea.
Joint patrols, intelligence sharing, and coordinated messaging are becoming routine. The pace of collaboration is faster than anything Asia has seen since the end of the Cold War. Yet the core question remains unresolved. Is this combined diplomatic, military, and strategic force strong enough to make Beijing hesitate? Deterrence is not about matching China vessel for vessel or missile for missile. It is about shaping China's calculations, raising the costs, the risks, and the uncertainty of escalation. Whether Japan and the Philippines can achieve that, together and backed by the United States, will define the security landscape of the Indo-Pacific for years to come.
The tightening partnership between Japan and the Philippines is not happening in a vacuum. It is unfolding in a region being reshaped by China's rapid military expansion and increasingly aggressive behavior at sea. The PLA Navy has grown into the world's largest by sheer number of ships, and Beijing is using that power not as a distant symbol, but as a daily tool of coercion across the West Philippine Sea and East China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels have intensified their harassment of Philippine resupply missions, firing high-pressure water cannons, conducting dangerous blocking maneuvers, ramming smaller boats, and even using lasers to blind crews. Scarborough Shoal and Second Thomas Shoal have transformed into frontline arenas, where China asserts control through constant presence, overwhelming numbers, and aggressive tactics meant to send one message: resistance is futile. Japan is facing its own version of this tightening squeeze. Chinese aircraft and ships are conducting more frequent and more complex maneuvers around the Senkaku Islands, testing Japan's air defenses and forcing its Coast Guard into near-daily scrambles. At the same time, Beijing has expanded air and naval activity around Taiwan, an island whose fate is inseparable from Japan's own security. Every missile China fires into waters around Taiwan lands uncomfortably close to Japan's southwest islands. Every PLA exercise rehearsing blockade scenarios threatens the sea lanes that keep Japan's economy alive. Both countries also face pressures that go beyond the visible confrontations at sea. Economic coercion, cyber intrusions, disinformation campaigns, and political intimidation have become part of China's wider playbook. These pressures remind Tokyo and Manila that Beijing's strategy is multi-layered and persistent. They also show a deeper realization. The crises each country faces are not isolated. A clash in the West Philippine Sea is connected to tensions in the East China Sea. Aggression around Taiwan affects both nations directly. And China's pursuit of regional dominance does not stop at maritime boundaries. It moves through trade, technology, diplomacy, and information. This shared sense of vulnerability is what now binds Japan and the Philippines closer than ever. Both governments understand that no problem in the Indo-Pacific stays local for long. A crisis in one area ripples across the region. The security of Taiwan affects the Philippines. The defense of the Senkaku Islands affects Japan's ability to support allies. And China's push into the West Philippine Sea has implications that stretch from Luzon to Okinawa. In that interconnected environment, Tokyo and Manila no longer see cooperation as optional or symbolic. They see it as an essential survival strategy, the only realistic way to balance China's expanding power and safeguard their own territorial and political futures. The turning point in Japan-Philippines security relations came with the signing of the Reciprocal Access Agreement, a pact finalized in July 2024 and entering into force in September 2025. For decades, the idea of Japanese troops operating on Philippine soil or Philippine forces training in Japan was politically impossible. But the strategic environment has shifted so dramatically, and Chinese pressure has grown so intense that both nations chose to break historical precedents in favor of hard security cooperation. The RAA formalizes what was once unimaginable: the legal ability for Japanese and Philippine forces to deploy, train, and operate inside each other's territory, complete with simplified logistics, rapid troop movement, and shared military infrastructure. The agreement is historic not just for Manila, but for Tokyo. This is Japan's first ever RAA with a Southeast Asian country, symbolizing its emergence from decades of strict post-war military restraint. It reflects a Japan that now sees regional defense as inseparable from its own national survival, and a Philippines that understands it must build a web of security partnerships stronger than any one alliance. The RAA is more than a treaty. It is a statement that the two nations have decided their defense futures are intertwined, their vulnerabilities shared, and their responses increasingly unified. The ink had barely dried on the agreement when both sides moved to test it. In October 2025, they launched their first joint drill under the new pact, a multi-domain exercise that extended across air, sea, land, and cyber elements.
It wasn't a symbolic handshake. It was an operational stress test. Japanese self-defense forces trained side by side with Filipino troops in amphibious operations, coastal defense, cyber resilience, and rapid disaster response. Maritime units coordinated patrols and surveillance drills across contested waters. Air assets from both countries rehearsed deployment procedures that would allow immediate mobilization if a crisis struck the region. The message from that first drill was unmistakable. This is not a slow or cautious alignment. Tokyo and Manila intend to use the RAA immediately, extensively, and strategically. It is a partnership built with the urgency of the moment, and one designed to function in the real world, not just in diplomatic announcements. Japan's security posture is transforming at a pace unseen since the end of World War II. What began as cautious rearmament has now become an assertive, forward-leaning strategy shaped by the reality that the next major flashpoint in Asia may erupt just a few hundred kilometers from Japan's southwestern islands. That shift became unmistakable when Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi traveled to Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost island, just 110 kilometers from Taiwan, to oversee the deployment of medium-range surface-to-air missile systems. The message was clear. Japan is preparing its frontline not for symbolic presence, but for real operational readiness. Tokyo insists these deployments are aimed at deterrence, not provocation. Yet Beijing sees them as evidence that Japan is aligning itself fully with the US strategy to contain China. These moves extend beyond Japan's own borders. Tokyo is strengthening Philippine maritime defense in ways that would have seemed unimaginable a decade ago. Japan has floated the offer of up to 6 Abukuma-class naval vessels, explored joint shipbuilding projects, expanded Coast Guard training, and furnished Manila with maritime radars and surveillance equipment. In the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard, Japan is becoming a central pillar of capacity building, quietly shaping the region's ability to resist maritime coercion. All of this fits into Japan's broader military transformation, the largest defense buildup since World War II, a soaring defense budget, and a tighter alignment with US Indo-Pacific objectives. Tokyo is preparing for the hardest scenario imaginable, a conflict involving Taiwan, the Philippines, or Japan itself, and building the capability to respond decisively. Beijing's reaction to Japan's growing regional role has been swift and severe. When Japanese officials made remarks supporting Taiwan's security, China retaliated with broad economic punishment, halting Japanese seafood imports, issuing travel advisories, prompting nearly 500,000 flight cancellations, and allowing nationalist rhetoric to surge online. Even diplomatic officials joined in. The Chinese consul in Osaka infamously amplified veiled threats toward Japan, framing Tokyo as a direct meddler in the Taiwan question. The Philippines has faced a different but equally hostile response. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have escalated their aggression with repeated water cannon assaults, ramming of smaller Philippine boats, laser harassment, and constant blocking of resupply missions at Second Thomas Shoal. Chinese officials insist the Philippines is operating in Chinese waters, attempting to reframe Manila's own EEZ as contested territory under Chinese authority. Behind these visible confrontations lies Beijing's deeper strategy: break the emerging Japan, Philippines, US alignment before it solidifies. China has increased political pressure on President Marcos Jr., especially after his candid acknowledgement that a Taiwan conflict would inevitably involve the Philippines. Beijing knows that a unified front poses the greatest challenge to its long-term objectives. Fragmenting it, through coercion, intimidation, or economic leverage, is key to China's calculus. The Japan-Philippines partnership does not stand alone. It is anchored within a much larger US-led security architecture. In November 2025, the three countries held their most significant trilateral exercise yet in the West Philippine Sea, an unmistakable demonstration of integrated maritime preparedness. Surface ships maneuvered together, aircraft coordinated patrol routes, and cyber units synchronized defenses. It was a rehearsal for the scenario everyone hopes to avoid, but must realistically prepare for. Washington has spent the last decade steadily tightening ties with both allies. Through EDCA, the US has gained rotational access to key Philippine bases, many located close to Taiwan or the South China Sea. With Japan, the long-standing security treaty remains the cornerstone of East Asian defense. Quietly, the US also encouraged the Japan-Philippines RAA, knowing that a stronger link between its two closest Indo-Pacific partners strengthens the first island chain from both ends. From Beijing's perspective, all of this looks like encirclement. It sees a hardening line of deterrence stretching from Japan's Nansei Islands to Luzon, reinforced by the US-Japan alliance and Washington's renewed military presence in the Philippines. To China, this is not coincidence. It is a coordinated architecture designed to contain its rise. President Marcos Jr. has already stated what previous administrations hesitated to admit. A Taiwan conflict will inevitably involve the Philippines. Geography alone ensures this. Philippine airspace, sea lanes, and bases sit along the primary routes for any response. The presence of more than 160,000 Filipino workers in Taiwan adds another layer of unavoidable obligation. Yet Manila faces internal pressures. Many Filipinos see the South China Sea, not Taiwan, as the primary national security concern. Others worry about sovereignty questions raised by foreign troop presence under EDCA and the RAA. There is also the uncertain question of obligations. What exactly must Manila do if Japan or the US request support during a Taiwan contingency? Despite these concerns, the strategic benefit is undeniable. Japan bolsters the Philippines' naval strength, provides advanced technology, and supports its modernization drive. For the first time, Manila has partners willing to help it push back against maritime coercion, not just with words, but with ships, radars, and joint operations. Deterrence in Asia is no longer about matching China platform for platform. It is about shaping Beijing's perception of cost and risk. And in this regard, Japan and the Philippines possess complementary advantages that matter more collectively than separately. Japan brings advanced naval and air power, cutting-edge missile systems, and world-class surveillance capabilities. The Philippines brings geography, the choke points, airspace, and sea corridors that shape China's ability to project force. Together, backed by the United States, they form a multi-directional deterrent that complicates China's planning. The RAA further strengthens this by enabling rapid deployment of Japanese forces into Philippine territory during a crisis. But limitations remain. Japan's constitution still imposes constraints. The Philippines faces capability gaps. China maintains overwhelming military superiority. And deterrence, by its nature, always carries the risk of provoking further pressure. The real key is the triangular structure: Japan plus Philippines plus United States. When these three act in alignment, the deterrent effect multiplies. Add Australia, and the geometry becomes even harder for China to ignore. Joint exercises between Japan and the Philippines are set to become routine, expanding into air and missile defense coordination, anti-submarine warfare, and cyber operations. Japan is positioning itself as the Philippines' most consistent defense partner in Southeast